Okay, to start out our first class on the book of Proverbs, the first proper class. Last week was all introductory and background material. I just want to read the memory verse that we're going to memorize in regards to this entire chapter that we're going to go through. So you'll have plenty of time to memorize it because I don't know how long it's going to take us to actually get through the entire first chapter of Proverbs, because we're just going to take our time and go verse by verse. So the start of each class, I'll try to remember to at least read the memory verse before we get started into the material. So it says, Proverbs 1:33, "But he who listens to me shall live securely and will be at ease from the dread of evil. But he who listens to me shall live securely and will be at ease from the dread of evil." Now, there were some questions that were raised in our introductory class, and I actually tried to search out the answers, so I'm just going to give some of that information before we actually get into Proverbs chapter 1, verse 1. Now, Solomon, it says in 1 Kings chapter 4, verses 32 through 34, it says that Solomon wrote 3,000 Proverbs and 1,005 songs. So we obviously know that Solomon wrote the book of Proverbs, but he also is the author of Ecclesiastes. He's also the author of the Song of Solomon. There is some apocryphal wisdom literature that's connected to him as well. There is something called the Wisdom of Solomon, which is almost just like Proverbs. And one that's almost like the Psalms, it's called the Odes of Solomon. So he has been attributed to have authored those books as well. So there's a lot of books, canonical books as well as apocryphal books that have been authored by Solomon. Now, Solomon, according to the scripture, had 700 wives and 300 concubines. Now, the children that were named in the scripture and in apocryphal literature, you have Rehoboam, which succeeded him as king. He was a son. Then it's rumored in apocryphal literature that he had a child by the Queen of Sheba, which is not recorded in our canonical scriptures, but his name was Menelik the First. And so apparently he ruled Ethiopia, I'm assuming, ruled Queen Sheba's kingdom after she passed. So that son is attributed to Solomon. I did not write that reference down. Yeah. I'm not exactly sure. I could try to find that. But that's rumored to be a son of his as well. But in the scripture, you have Rehoboam, which we know. You have a daughter named Taphath, and you also have another daughter whose name is Basemath. And those are actually mentioned in Scripture. Now, we could only make assumptions to exactly how many children he had if we are to assume that he actually had one child, at least one child from the 700 wives and 300 concubines. That would bring up the number to 1,000 children. But usually you have 2 or 3, so it could have been anywhere from 1,000 to 3,000 children that King Solomon fathered, if indeed he actually had a child with each and every woman he was married to, whether it was one of his 700 wives or one of his 300 concubines. So that's just a little more of background information. I did a little bit more digging for you. Now, just kind of a fun fact, the word wise or the word wisdom is used at least 125 times in the book of Proverbs. So it's kind of obvious that that is the whole theme of the book, is wisdom. That's the theme of Proverbs. So with that background information out of the way, let's go ahead and jump right into the scriptures here. So in Proverbs chapter 1, verse 1, in the New American Standard Bible, it says, "The Proverbs of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel." So that's kind of an obvious statement, but it establishes the authorship of Proverbs, and it's kind of a prologue and introduction that we're going to go through. So the first 7 verses of the book of Proverbs, which I hope to get through tonight. The first 7 verses is like the prologue or the introduction to the book of Proverbs. It gives us the purpose statement of why Solomon wrote Proverbs, why he did this. So it says, the Proverbs of Solomon, the son of David. So he's establishing his lineage, which is David, which is the king of Israel. He had the united kingdom at that time. We know that after Solomon's death, the kingdom would be split in 2. So the Proverbs of Solomon, the son of David, the king of Israel. So jumping right into verse 2, we've already established the author's identity. Now we're getting into the purpose of why Solomon wrote Proverbs. Verse 2, it says, to know wisdom and instruction, to discern the sayings of understanding. So one of the first purposes, as you'll see on the board, to the book of Proverbs is first to know. To know what? To know wisdom and to know instruction. Now, there's an equation that we can write, and it's kind of a backwards equation. Usually an equation is 1 + 1 = 2, but we're going to give the answer first. So if you want to write down this equation, it's been said that wisdom equals knowledge and obedience. So if you have knowledge and you're obedient to that knowledge, that is going to bring about wisdom. That will equal wisdom. So if there's a formula to wisdom, that would be it. Knowledge plus obedience equals wisdom. So the first thing we have is the purpose of Proverbs is to know. To know what? To know wisdom and instruction. And we're going to get into more detail on what these words actually mean, because we're throwing a lot of words out here such as wisdom and understanding and knowledge and instruction and justice and equity and prudence and all these different words. And we hear these words, but it's really good that when we dig into the nuts and bolts and find out what the words really mean in the Hebrew, because one word in Hebrew could be translated 3 or 4 different ways. So to know wisdom and instruction. So the second reason and purpose for the book of Proverbs is to discern, or you could also say to perceive. To discern or to perceive what? To discern or to perceive sayings of understanding. So that's the second purpose of the book of Proverbs. First is wisdom and instruction. Second is the sayings of understanding. Thirdly, the reason that the book of Proverbs was written is to receive what? To receive instruction in wisdom, but also to receive instruction in wisdom, righteousness, justice, and equity. So let me go ahead and read verse 3. To receive instruction in wise behavior, righteousness, justice, and equity. Verse 4. To give prudence to the naive, or you could also say to the simple, and to the youth. In other words, we're going to give to the youth knowledge and discretion. So we have to know wisdom and instruction, to discern and or to perceive sayings of understanding, to receive instruction, wisdom, righteousness, justice, and equity, and to give, this is number 4, to give prudence to the simple, or prudence to the naive. And as we also read in verse 4, to the youth, we're going to give to the youth knowledge and discretion. So that's the 5th reason, and that's the 5th purpose of writing the book of Proverbs. So verse 5 says, a wise man will hear and increase in his learning, and a man of understanding will acquire wise counsel. So the 5th reason, or the 6th reason rather, for the writing of the book of Proverbs is to give wisdom. It's addressed to the wise, and it's addressed to those that are of understanding. It's for those that have already received wisdom and understanding. It's just basically to increase their knowledge and to advance their education. So right here in the book of Proverbs, in this introduction, in this prologue section, we're learning that the Proverbs are not just for the beginner, but it's for the advanced as well. So the Proverbs, you can jump in the book of Proverbs and be at any learning level. You can be a novice, you can be a beginner, you can be a simpleton, or you can be a PhD, a doctorate. You can be a master of divinity. You can have the highest education, and Proverbs is still going to be an advantage to you. You're still going to increase your learning. You may learn stuff that you already know, but it's good to have a refresher. But even so, you're going to get something out of Proverbs. So it's not just for the youth, even though it's predominantly addressed to the youth, for the simple fact that we've established earlier that Solomon is basically raising up his sons to be able to take over as king. So he's teaching them how to be a king, the proper behaviors, the proper protocol of royalty, the rule of law, how to conduct themselves at home and afar, how to be a good ambassador, how to conduct themselves publicly and privately. So as we said, number 6, it's addressed to the wise and to those of understanding to increase and advance their education. And so verse 6 says, to understand a proverb and a figure, the words of the wise and their riddles. So the 7th reason for writing the book of Proverbs is addressed to those who already have understanding, and it's addressed to them so that they know how to decipher and how to interpret proverbs and riddles. Because we know that a proverb is a wise saying. It's a simple saying that teaches a lesson, but if you get into the Proverbs, sometimes it's a little tongue twister or even a little brain puzzle, and you're like, wait a second, what does this mean? What is Solomon really trying to say? So sometimes a proverb is very obvious, and it's just kind of, there's really no explanation or further interpretation needed. You just read it, and it says what it says, it is what it is, it's simple. But other times you read a proverb, and you're like, whoa, wait, that's deep. Hang on a second, this is a little confusing here. Let's parse this out a little bit more. Now, Dr. Warren Wiersbe, who has wrote a book or a commentary on the book of Proverbs, and I highly recommend it. I think it's called Be Skillful. He has a commentary on virtually every book of the Bible, and it's called the Be series. It's always be something. And I think for Proverbs, it's to be skillful. And this is what he said. He said, we are living in the information age, but we certainly are not living in the age of wisdom. Yeah. I mean, we are bombarded with information. And information and wisdom are not the same thing. They're two totally different things. There's a lot of useless information out there. I remember as a kid, I didn't have the greatest marks in elementary school because I always wanted to be outside playing. I always wanted to have a notepad and a pen, and I always wanted to draw. I didn't want to be at school. I didn't want to learn that stuff. So I didn't have very good grades in elementary school, but yet I'd go home and I would watch all my cartoons after school and on Saturday, and when a certain commercial would come on, I could repeat that commercial verbatim. And my mom's like, you can memorize these commercials. Why can't you memorize your lessons at school? Well, because it's put to a nice tune and it's fun and it's entertaining, but yet it was just information. It was useless. I could not use the information in those commercials in my daily life. It didn't add to my knowledge or wisdom or learning one bit. So we're bombarded with information, and especially in pop culture. It's like I know I'm old now, that I'm getting old, because I don't know who's in the top 40 on the music charts. Some of these new singers and celebrities, I'm like, I've never heard of them. Where did they come from? Who are they? Like, oh man, they stink. I can't even stand their music. So I could tell I'm getting old because I don't know who's who anymore in the music world. And even in Hollywood, I don't know who's who. Now, recently, Tim Conway died. Oh yeah, I know who Tim Conway is. He was one of the greats. He's hilarious. Mrs. Huygens. Yeah, and he played the oldest man that ever lived, or the oldest man in the world, and him and Harvey Korman. Oh my goodness, man, they'd keep you in stitches. But my daughter in that generation, they don't even know who Tim Conway is. So we're getting, that's a bunny trail. I apologize for that. But, there's a lot of information in this world, and we're living in the information age, but, there's really no wisdom. And all you have to do is listen to the news and listen to the far liberal left, and they say things that sound good on the surface, but when you really analyze what they say, they're like, you're contradicting yourself. It doesn't make sense. Anyway, so All right, so let's get on into verse 2. Verse 1, we already established who the author of Proverbs is, and going through a quick rundown of verses 2 through 7, we've established the purpose or the reason of Proverbs. I don't think I read verse 7, so let me just go ahead and read that, and we'll go back to verse 2. So the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. I was awful foolish when I was a kid. I despised wisdom and instruction because I didn't care about reading, writing, and arithmetic. I wanted to watch G.I. Joe and Transformers, and I was entertained by these silly commercials that were on TV, and I could memorize those, but I couldn't memorize my multiplication tables. Then I found out I had dyscalculia, so that's why I couldn't memorize the multiplication tables. So verse 2, let's break verse 2 down. Verse 2 says, to know wisdom and instruction. So let's just stop right there and just take that first part of verse 2. To know wisdom and instruction. Now the word know in the Hebrew is the word yada. Have you ever heard that word before, yada? Anybody watch Seinfeld? Yada, yada, yada. Yeah, exactly. So yada is a Hebrew and a Yiddish word that means, you know. So in a conversation, and I do this all the time, it's one of my verbalized pauses. Maybe I shouldn't give it away because now you'll be listening to it when I preach. But I'll be saying something, then I'll say, you know. So yada, yada, yada is just, you know. That's what it means. But yada is a very special word. It just doesn't mean to know. It means to know intimately. So there's an intimacy there. And it's actually used in Genesis 4, verse 1, where it says Adam knew Eve. Well, of course he knew Eve. It was the only other human being on the planet. No. He knew Eve, if you know what I'm saying. It refers to a sexual intimacy. So how that's about the most intimate you could get. Because it says in the Word of God that the two shall become one flesh. They become one soul. So, I could tell that, when my father passed away, my mother truly believed that she lost her better half. She felt like half a person, and she's never been the same since my father passed away because they were intimate. They knew each other inside and out. They were one entity. They were two individuals, yes, but they were one soul. And so Genesis 4:1 says Adam knew Eve, and that's the word yada. So it means not just to intellectually know, but it means to know on an intimate level. Now this word know is also used in the passage in the Gospels where it says, where Jesus is giving that sheep and the goats thing, and he says, he'll say to those, those people that will say, well, Lord, didn't we give to the poor and clothe the naked, and didn't we, feed the homeless, and didn't we perform miracles and do all these things in your name? We did all these great works, Lord. And he says, depart from me, you workers of iniquity. And that word iniquity means lawlessness. So depart from me, you workers of lawlessness, for I never knew you. I was never intimate with you. Now, when I first came here it's going on 7 months. Man, I can't believe that. It's going on 7 months since I've been here as your pastor. But when I first came here, I knew you intellectually. I could look at you and say, okay, well, there's Trixie. Well, there's Tracy. Okay, yeah, I know Ron. I know Dave. I know Lynn. But now that I've been here for 6 months, it's not just that I know you by sight. I know you intellectually. I know your name. I'm getting to know you on a more personal and intimate level. I'm getting to know your likes, your dislikes, your personalities. At first, it was kind of awkward because you would say stuff and I couldn't tell if you were joking or being serious. Now I know who's the cut up and who's the more serious person. So I'm getting to know you in a more intimate way. And that's what it's saying here in verse 2. So to know wisdom, not just to intellectually know it, but to know it into your heart and into your soul, to know it intimately, to have a relationship with wisdom. And it's interesting because wisdom, as we'll read throughout the Proverbs, is personified, and it's often called a she. It's giving anthropomorphic form to this word and this concept, wisdom. So wisdom is almost like a lover, almost like a mother, almost like a sister. It's a female entity that you become intimate with. You just don't know by name. You know by intimacy. You know the emotions. You know the ins and outs of wisdom. And that's how we're to know wisdom. We're to know intimately, to know wisdom. Now, this word wisdom in the Hebrew is chokhmah. No, I didn't have anything hung in my throat. That's really what the word is, chokhmah. Because in the Hebrew, there's a lot of guttural sounds. So you have the word wisdom, which is chokhmah, and basically wisdom, you can equate it with experiential insight. Experiential insight, which we could also say comes from life experiences. Now, how we gain wisdom, now if you remember the equation that I gave earlier, it says knowledge plus obedience equals wisdom. So once I learn about something and learn the right thing to do and what not to do, and I apply that and I become obedient to that, that becomes wisdom. And so sometimes wisdom is learned by mistakes we've made. Now, nobody likes to be wrong. Nobody likes to make mistakes. But, I think I'm probably going to get this quote wrong, but something to the effect, Thomas Edison, when he was asked about inventing the light bulb, he said, before I had actually invented the light bulb, I found out, I discovered hundreds and hundreds of ways how not to make a light bulb. So, you could look at failure as, oh, I messed up, I'm so dumb, what am I thinking, I'm stupid, I can't do anything right. You can look at failure like that, which I suggest you don't do because it's negative. Instead, look at failures as, you know what, I'm going to learn from this. Yeah, I messed up. Yeah, I fell flat on my face. Yeah, I even got made fun of. But guess what? I learned a lesson from it. Now I know what to do. Now I know how to do this particular thing better because now I know not what not to do. So look at failure as a learning experience. And especially in the church, when you're asked to do something for the church, to be on a committee or to try something new or to, a lot of times we're afraid, like you're probably thinking to yourself, oh my goodness, what if I mess up? Everybody will know that I messed up. Nobody's going to laugh at you. Nobody's going to yell at you. Nobody's going to make fun of you. We're going to applaud you because, hey, at least you tried. And that's what we want. And you can learn from those experiences. Yes, it's painful to be wrong, but I like being wrong. Why do I like being wrong? Because it leads me to being right. Because ultimately I want to be right. Ultimately I want to know the truth. So if the road to wisdom is paved with failure, then let me fail. Because I want to be wise. I want to learn from those mistakes. So wisdom is chokhmah, which is experiential insight or life experiences. So wisdom comes with age and with experience. And I'm sure that we could all share stories of how we were young and stupid. And now that we have gray hair or no hair, that we're much wiser now because of the stupid things we did in our youth. Whether it's learning about banking or finances or running a home or what have you. I remember when Pam and I got married, we were 21. We thought we were on top of the world. We thought we knew it all. Now we've been married for 25 years, and we look back on our 21-year-old selves, and we're like, man, we're stupid. Boy, we were dumb. We thought our parents were dumb, but actually they knew all along the right thing to do. So we have to know wisdom and instruction. Now the word instruction, it's a very interesting word. There's several words that are translated instruction. One of them is Torah, and you may have heard me say that quite a bit. Torah is usually translated as law, usually in reference to the law of Moses, the first 5 books of Moses. But the Torah also means instruction. But this is not that particular word. This particular word that's used here in Proverbs 1:2 is musar. It's the Hebrew word musar. And actually, musar is the name of Jewish ethics. I've actually owned a couple books called a book of musar. In other words, it's a book of Jewish ethics. So this word instruction is musar. It means Jewish ethics, but it's literally translated, or it literally means to be disciplined, to have self-control. So we can kind of relate this to willpower. Instruction, musar, we can relate that to willpower. It means discipline and self-control. And so we can kind of liken this to a personal trainer. So I remember when I was in my mid-30s, I started having aches and pains where I shouldn't have had aches and pains. And I'm like, wow, I'm getting old. I got to do something about this. So I started exercising. And when I started exercising, I hated it. I hated it. It was miserable. Get all sweaty and all stinky, get out of breath jogging for 20 minutes, and don't even talk about weightlifting. I hated that even more. But eventually, once I started to like cardio workouts, after a while, at first I hated it because it was uncomfortable. It was painful. It wasn't fun. But I had self-control. I had discipline. I said, you know what? I could quit, but that would get me nowhere. I'm going to stick with it. And even if I don't like it, I'm going to keep doing it because I know it's good for me. I know it's what I need to do. And when I started doing this cardiovascular workout, I noticed that my asthma improved. I didn't have as many asthma attacks. I noticed that I didn't have the aches and pains that I was starting to get. My joints were becoming loose and I was becoming more limber. I was able to run longer distances for longer periods of time, and I wasn't and sucking air. I mean, I could breathe comfortably, and I ended up running a 5K. So, and I ended up actually liking running and liking jogging. So what I first hated, I ended up loving. So sometimes instruction isn't fun. But just as the word musar relates to discipline and self-control and willpower, we've got to use our willpower to do what's right. Even at first, we don't want to do it, even though we don't feel like it. So we know a personal trainer, they're the ones that help us stay on track. When we lose our willpower or lose our discipline or get lazy or lax, they're that kindly drill sergeant that's behind us that says, come on, I know you can lift that one more time. Oh, my muscles are shaking. I can't do it. I can't. Yeah, you can. You can. Go. I know you can do it. You can get out one more. And you lift that weight and you're like, oh, you did it. But by yourself, you couldn't do it. You had to have that personal trainer, that Jiminy Cricket, so to speak, that's goading you to keep going. So that's the word instruction. Now, once a personal trainer instructs you how to properly exercise, and you actually get to the place where you enjoy exercise, you can let go of your personal trainer and you can do this on your own because he corrects your techniques. Because at first, when you're jogging or lifting weights, you're doing it the wrong way and you end up hurting yourself. So a personal trainer is there to instruct you in the correct forms on how to run, on how to lift, on how to do certain exercises. And once you know how to do those on your own so that you don't get hurt, you can let your personal trainer go and you can just go on yourself on your own self-discipline and your own willpower. So to know wisdom and instruction, and let's go to the second half of verse 2, to discern the sayings of understanding. To discern the sayings of understanding. So, understanding is the word binah. Binah. And understanding, binah, means intellectual insight. Intellectual insight. If you want to put it on Tobic terms, that's book learning. So we can say that understanding is book learning. So we have wisdom, instruction, and understanding in verse 2. And you can liken that to sections of the Old Testament. Now, Christianity calls it the Old Testament, but the Jewish people, they call it the Tanakh. So if you ever hear somebody talk about the Tanakh, they're talking about the Old Testament, exact same book we have. They just call it by a different name. And it's really neat because Tanakh is actually a Hebrew acronym that represents something. So Tanakh, you have the T, which is Torah, and that's the first 5 books of Moses. So that's the law. So you have Tanakh. T is Torah, it's the law. You have N, which is Nevi'im, which is the prophets. So that's the prophetic writings. So in Matthew 5, Jesus says, don't think that I've come to do away with the law and the prophets. He was talking about the Tanakh. So you have the T for Torah, which is law, the N for Nevi'im, which is the prophets. Then you have the K, which is Ketuvim, which means the writings. And Ketuvim, the writings, actually incorporates Proverbs, Psalms, Lamentations, Song of Solomon, a lot of the poetic and wisdom literature that's in the scriptures. So if we had to take wisdom, instruction, and understanding and assign a section of the Old Testament to it, we could say that wisdom is the ketuvim. Wisdom, because that's what the wisdom writings are all about. They're called the ketuvim. We can say that the instructions, or the musar, the Jewish ethics, the discipline, the self-control, we could say that the instructions are related to the Torah, related to the law, because if you remember, the word Torah also means instructions. Now, understanding, we could relate that to the Nevi'im, to the prophets, because the prophets had a lot of intellectual insight and a lot of understanding in their prophetic writings. So we have contained in verse 2 a vague allusion to the entirety of the Old Testament scriptures. To know wisdom, that's to know the writings. To know instruction, that is to know the Torah. To discern the sayings of understanding, to discern the sayings of the prophets, because no other books are more hard or difficult to understand than the prophetic writings, especially when you get into stuff in Ezekiel and Daniel. Ezekiel's talking about flying scrolls and four-faced heavenly beings and animals, and Daniel's talking about weird statues, and so it's difficult to understand. So to discern the sayings of understanding. Does anybody have any questions or comments or anything at this time? Okay, we'll move on. Verse 3. So verse 3 says, to receive instruction in wise behavior. To receive instruction in wise behavior. The word wise behavior in the Hebrew is sakhal. Sakhal. And it means to be prudent, to use rationale, to think, to feel, to speak, and to act with full knowledge and repercussions of one's actions. That's a lot. So that's what wise behavior means. To think, feel, speak, and act with full knowledge and repercussions of one's actions. To be prudent and to be rational. I also have here that it implies, the implication here is conservatism. It also implies discretion and common sense. Within this information age where we have little wisdom, oh Lord, we need common sense more than ever before. So it also implies sober vigilance. To be sober, to be circumspect, to be alert. It also implies the proper cultural sensitivity and protocol. So we can say that proper behavior or wise behavior deals with manners and etiquette. And so that differs from one culture to another. Used to in Western society, in Canada, in the United States, and in Europe, it was very impolite and rude to go into a building with your hat on. You would take your hat off when you go into a building. But yet in Israel and in the Middle East, it was rude if you didn't wear a hat. So, it depends on where you're at, the culture that you're in. And this is a big part of what missions and evangelism is all about. Because when I was in Nigeria, I didn't dress like a Westerner. I didn't wear jeans and a t-shirt. I didn't wear a suit and tie. When I was in Nigeria, I dressed like the Nigerians do. I dressed like the Igbo people. I wore the African garments and the African clothing. I ate the same foods they ate. I tried to learn enough language to where I could greet somebody or, say goodbye to somebody. And I learned the proper protocol. And that goes a long way, because when you take the time to really care about a people group, you take time to learn about their culture. And when you express interest in their culture and when you practice their culture in front of them, they are so impressed, because to them, you're actually taking the time to get to know them. Now, I remember one time I was eating, and there's even a certain way that you have to eat certain foods. There's a food called fufu and pepper soup. Now, fufu is made from the cassava plant. And when you mill it, you make it into like this doughy ball. And there's this big dough ball of cassava, and then you have this pepper soup, which is a spicy soup that has spices in it and different kind of meats. Well, what you're supposed to do is take off a piece of this fufu, dip it in the pepper soup, and swallow it. Culturally, you're not supposed to chew the fufu. And I learned this. So I would take little small pieces because I didn't want to suck down a big ball of fufu, of cassava. So I just took little bits and I did that. And they were watching me like a hawk as I was eating. And all of a sudden I heard whispers throughout the whole dining room. Anoinche ibu, anoinche ibu, anoinche ibu. I turned to my friend and said, what's this anoinche ibu? He laughed. He says, they're calling you a white ibu. And then I had a couple people come to me and say later, you're more Ibu than we are. So it goes a long way because I learned wise behavior among the Ibu people. I learned their manners, their etiquette, their protocol. And so that's what this is talking about here. And so, since Solomon is speaking to his sons, would-be kings, would-be rulers, he's saying that you need to know wise behavior. You need to know how to properly act like a king, like an ambassador. Because all princes are ambassadors. They're either sent to other countries to learn and to educate, kind of like a cross-cultural exchange student kind of thing, or they become judges within their own nation. We know that Absalom was a judge, which was one of David's sons. So they have offices of rulership even as a prince. So as they're being raised and being brought up, they have to learn this wise behavior. They have to learn this protocol, especially if they're being sent to Syria or to Egypt or to another country as an ambassador. They need to learn all this cultural things. And I'm a big Star Trek fan. I'm a big Trekkie. And so, as you're watching Star Trek, especially the other spin-offs like Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, they focused a lot on wise behavior and ambassadorial protocol. They had to learn about specific alien cultures, and you had to say certain things in an exact way, and the wrong inflection would totally offend them, and things like that. So that's kind of what this is talking about. To receive instruction in wise behavior, manners, etiquette, and all right, let's move on here. The other part says righteousness, justice, and equity. So we got three words here: righteousness, justice, and equity. To receive instruction in wise behavior, righteousness, justice, and equity. So righteousness comes from the word which is zedek. And it means righteousness. Rightness means to be right. It means to be straight. It means to be honest. It means to be unbiased and undeviant in truth and justice. You've heard the saying, a straight shooter. That person's a straight shooter. That means that they're blunt, they tell it like it is, they tell the truth, and let the chips fall where they may, right? You've also heard somebody say, well, that person, he's as straight as an arrow. It means that they're honest, that they're, just as a straight arrow would shoot straight and hit its target, so an honest person is straight like an arrow. So that's what righteousness means. It just means to be straight, to be right, to be honest, to be truthful, to be unbiased, to seek out justice. And that word justice is the word mishpat in the Hebrew. So the word justice, mishpat, means to be right, to be true, to be fair in your verdict. To be right, true, and fair in your verdict when you're judging. So justice implies pronouncing a sentence in a case. So when you pronounce a sentence in a case, you want it to be a just sentence. You want the punishment to fit the crime. You want to be fair. You want to be right, and you want to be true in your verdict. Righteousness, justice, and equity. Equity is meshar in the Hebrew, equity. And it means evenness. It implies balance. It means prosperity, and it means fairness. So that's the word equity. Now let me jump back to justice really quick because I did forget to say something. So recall that Absalom was a judge and used his position to curry favor with the people in order to overthrow his father, King David. So the sons of the king were ambassadors and judges, so they had to know about justice. And so Absalom, he would always say, oh, if I were judge, I would hear your case and I would give you justice. Well, that made the people fall in love with them, because if they thought, oh, well, don't bother my dad, he's king, he's too busy to hear such a petty case, let me deal with it, I'll give you justice. And that's what people want. So that was a way of currying favor, for Absalom anyway. All right, so we've covered verses 1, 2, and 3. Any questions up to this point? I know when I'm preaching, sometimes I go fast because I have to say a lot in a short amount of time, but in this class, we can kind of take our time. So if I'm going too fast for you, just tell me to slow down. I've got to learn how to pace myself because I haven't taught in a long time. I've preached quite a bit, but it's been a while since I've taught. All right, verse 4. To give prudence to the naive, or to give prudence to the simple. Now, this word give is where we get our English name, Nathan. If you know anybody whose name is Nathan, it means to give. It means that person is to be a giver. So Nathan, Nathan. So give, Nathan. It means to put something in place of another. Example, since we're talking about wisdom here, we're replacing ignorance with wisdom, knowledge, and understanding. So this word Nathan means give, but there's also there's that implication of an exchange, like a fair exchange. You give me your ignorance, and I'll give you wisdom in return. Is what the implication is. It also the word give also implies something improvement, betterment. So what you're getting back is something better than what you gave. Because let's face it, ignorance is not a very good thing to give. It's kind of a crappy gift, right? But to get wisdom and understanding and knowledge in return for your ignorance, that you get the better deal. You're being bettered by that. You're being improved by that process. So that's the Hebrew word give. So it says to give prudence to the naive. The word prudence, the word prudence is orma in the Hebrew. And prudence means subtlety, willingness, cunning, and discretion. It means craftiness. And I know some of these descriptions kind of have a negative context because when you say that somebody's crafty, you're saying that they're shifty, they're shady. But that's not what the implication here is in the Hebrew. Prudence just means that somebody, I guess you could say you've got street knowledge, right? You've got street wisdom, street smarts. Yeah, that's what I was looking for. You got street smarts. That's kind of what prudence is. So somebody comes up to you and wants to sell you a used car and you're prudent about it. You're going to analyze this guy to see how shady he is and if he's trying to pull a fast one over you and sell you a lemon. You're going to be prudent about your purchase. So prudence is the Hebrew word orma. It means subtlety. And we know that Satan has been described as this in the garden, that the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. Right? He was crafty. He was cunning. So you can use craftiness and cunning in a good way because you've heard of army generals as being cunning in battle, cunning, which means that they knew how to strategize well in order to win a battle or in order to win a conflict or a war. So these words we often associate with something negative and maybe even sinful, but remember that cunningness and craftiness could be used for good or for evil, right? It could be good or bad. So prudence, subtlety, willingness, cunning, discretion, that's a positive word, discretion, to be discreet. So basically the word prudence means to think several steps ahead and anticipate a double cross. So can anybody think of a game that somebody might play where they would employ prudence? Perfect. Exactly what I was looking for, chess. Because to win a chess game, you have to think 3 or 4 moves ahead of the other opponent. You've got to anticipate the move of the other opponent in order to win a chess game. You got to be watchful. Yeah, that's another good word, watchful. Watchful, it reminds me of somebody who's watching on a wall for an enemy, keeping guard, right? Being prudent. So that's a perfect example. So thinking several steps ahead and anticipating a double cross. So like we said, a chess game would be a perfect example. Also, another example of prudence or cunning or craftiness is maybe even a magician. because they use sleight of hand, or even a mentalist. A mentalist will make you think that they have psychic powers, but they're just they're being prudent about human behavior. They're reading facial expressions and body language, and they're anticipating the answers and moves of their audience and of the people. So, they have all these neat tricks that make it look like they're magical and make it look like that they're psychic, when in fact, they're just reading you so well. They're being crafty, they're being prudent, they're being cunning. They're called a mentalist. So, to give prudence to the naive or to the simple. All right, and so continuing on with the second half of verse 4, to the youth, knowledge and discretion. Now, the word youth is the Hebrew word na'ar. And youth could mean somebody of a prepubescent age. Somebody from birth to 13 years old would be what this word youth means. But also this word na'ar could mean a servant. It could also mean somebody who is less intelligent than you, or somebody who does not have the same caliber of education as you. So youth can mean several different things. Prepubescence to age 13, 0 to 13. It could also mean a servant, or somebody who is not as intellectually smart as you or have the education that you do. So that's what verse 4, second half of verse 4 is addressed to. To the youth. To the youth, we want to give knowledge. The word knowledge is the Hebrew word da'at. And this word knowledge, da'at, means knowledge gained through the senses. I guess you could say it's almost like the scientific method. What you could see, feel, touch, taste, smell. But it also implies common sense. It also implies having a little bit of common sense. Now, this word knowledge has also been used, or at least the Hebrew root word for knowledge, have been used in other passages to describe hunting, to describe sailing, to describe playing an instrument. So this word da'at, knowledge, has also an essence of having a skill, of being skillful at something. So Solomon is wanting to give the youth skillful knowledge. That's what he's wanting to get across to the youth, is skillful knowledge, common sense. Now, there's 3 words that are repeated over and over and over in the book of Proverbs. And the 3 words are also very, very common in Judaism. Now, you're going to hear the word chokhmah, which is wisdom, bina, which is understanding, and da'at, which is knowledge. Wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. Chokhmah, bina, and da'at. Now, there is actually an Orthodox Jewish sect that is named after wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. They've taken chokhmah, bina, and da'at and made an acronym out of it. And it's called Chabad. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Chabad sect. They're also called the Lubavitchers. Now, this is the Orthodox sect of Judaism that believed that Rabbi Schneerson was the Messiah. And he has since passed away. But they're very, very prominent on the web. Chabad.org has a huge, huge website, huge followers and a huge subscriber. But they named their sect of Judaism after wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. Chokhmah, bina, and da'at, which is Chabad. So to give prudence to the naive and the simple, to the youth knowledge, skillful knowledge we could say, and discretion. So this word discretion, it is mizma, and it means to meditate and plan ahead. It means to plot. So it's the ability to devise a wise plan after understanding a matter. That's what discretion is. So discretion, another good example of discretion would be, let's say that you caught somebody committing a sin. And maybe they're ignorant of this. Maybe they didn't really know that they were sinning. So you don't want to embarrass the person. You don't want to shame them publicly. You want to be discreet about the matter. You want to show discretion. So the way you do that is you take them aside quietly and privately and say, hey, look, I saw you do this or say this or that the other day. And according to the word of God right here in book so-and-so, chapter and verse so-and-so, this is what the word of God says. And maybe they would be like, oh my goodness, I didn't realize that. Oh, wow, well, thanks for letting me know. So you didn't put them to shame. You didn't beat them across the head. You didn't punish them or make them look stupid or dumb. You took them aside in a discreet manner privately and lovingly revealed to them their mistake. And that's what you have to do, especially with young believers that are just coming into the faith, because there's a lot they don't know. So discretion is the ability to devise a wise plan after understanding a matter. So discretion is also the practical application of knowledge. So one of the best examples of the practical application of knowledge that I can think of is putting together a piece of furniture from IKEA. Right? That would be showing discretion, because number one, you go and pick up your package at IKEA, whether it's a dresser drawer or a chair or whatever it is. First of all, you have to read the instructions. And after reading the instructions, you have to plan and visualize how to assemble those parts. And after you plan and visualize how to assemble the parts, you actually physically put it together. So you devise a wise plan after understanding a matter. You read the instructions, you look at the pieces, and you're like, oh, I get it now. I see how this connects. And then you're like, okay, the instructions say do it this way, so I'm going to follow the instructions, but I could actually do it this way and make it better. And so you put it together and boom, there's your piece of IKEA furniture. That is showing discretion. And so that's what Solomon is trying to address to the youth, to give prudence to the naive and to the youth knowledge and discretion. Let's see, maybe we can squeeze in verse 5 here. We still got about 10 minutes of class left. Let's see if we can squeeze in verse 5. So verse 5 says, a wise man will hear and increase in learning, and a man of understanding will acquire wise counsel. So a wise man will hear and increase in learning. So if somebody is already wise, sometimes when you become wise, you get a little bit apathetic and complacent in your wisdom. So what Solomon is wanting to do is give fuel to the fire. He wants to give ammunition and to bulk up his student. So here, okay, I have a bachelor's degree in Bible and missions. So if I wanted to, as the scriptures say, a wise man will hear and increase in learning. If I wanted to increase in learning, I can go back to school and go for my master's degree. That would be the next step. That would give me ammunition, fuel to my fire. It would bulk me up educationally. And so from a bachelor to a master's, from a master's to a PhD, right? So that's increasing someone's learning. And so learning here means something learned from someone else. So something learned that I can't learn by myself or on my own, I've got to learn it from someone else. A good example of that would be if I went out onto the reserve and I was going to go pick mushrooms. I would have to get an elder who has been in the woods and who knows about mushrooms, because I could pick the wrong one. I could pick a deadly one, which would be bad. I could pick a magic one, which would be bad. There's only one mushroom that I know that I could pick and is safe, and I don't think they grow around this area. They grow in Ohio, where I come from. So it says, a wise man will hear and increase in learning, and a man of understanding will acquire counsel. So the word wise man is that word chokmah. And it's prudence, intelligence, experience, wisdom gained by life experience. It's divine wisdom and wisdom that comes from God. So a wise man will hear and increase his learning. A wise man will hear. Now you guys are all hearing me right now. But when you walk out of these doors, out of this class, will you still hear me? Kind of, okay? How will you hear me after you walk? You remember, but what else do you do? You act on it. And that's what this Hebrew word is. This Hebrew word is shema. And it's translated as hear, but it could actually be translated as two words, to hear and to obey. The John 3:16 of Judaism is Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Hear, O Israel, hear and obey, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. So that word Shema means to hear with attention and with obedience. So a wise man will hear and obey, and he will increase his learning. So he's not just hearing it, he's actually putting what he's heard into practice. And that's what we want to do in this class. That's what we want to do in Proverbs. We not only just want to hear it, because if you just hear it and walk out the doors and that's the end of it, then we're wasting our time. I'm wasting my breath up here. But if you hear it, meditate on it, think about it, and actually apply it to your life, obey it and live it, then you've got something there. Then you're fulfilling and living out the Proverbs. A wise man will hear and increase in his learning. The word increase means to continually add to. To continually add to. So a good example of this is in the wintertime when you're a kid and you go to the top of the hill, maybe you're done sled riding for the day and you're tired and you don't want to walk up the hill anymore, but you still want to have fun. You make a little snowball. Then you take that snowball and you set it rolling down a hill. What happens to that snowball? It gets bigger because it increases. It's continually being added to. As it rolls down the hill, it's picking up more snow, and it becomes bigger. And that's what this word here, increase, means, to continually add to. It's the snowball effect. So to increase learning. Now this word learning is lachach in Hebrew, and it means persuasive doctrine. Learning means persuasive doctrine. So in Christendom and in Judaism, what is persuasive doctrine? We call it something. Have you ever heard of the word apologetics? Apologetics is a theological term that's used and thrown around in Bible college a lot. Apologetics is a course of study where you're learning about what you believe and why you believe it, and to prove what you believe is right. That's what apologetics is. It's not just knowing what you believe, it's knowing why you believe it and knowing why it's true. So that's what apologetics is, and that's what this word implies. It's persuasive doctrine. It implies apologetics, to learn something from someone else, to learn what you believe, why you believe it, and why it's true, why it's fact. So that's what that means. A wise man will hear and obey. He will increase and add to his persuasive doctrine. He will add to his apologetics. He will add to his persuasive arguments on what he believes and why he believes it. And the second half of this verse says, a man of understanding will acquire wise counsel. A man of understanding. This word understanding comes from the word bina, which means understanding, but it's the word bin, and it is one who is intelligent, direct yet discreet, and eloquently skillful. That's what this particular word understanding means. A man of understanding, or in other words, a man who is intelligent and discreet and eloquent and skillful, will acquire wise counsel. He will attain wise counsel. So that word acquire means to attain by purchase or to redeem. So godly education costs us something. Godly education costs us our life. It costs us our entire commitment. That's how we attain learning, knowledge, and understanding, is we attain it by giving of ourselves. And that's what the Lord requires of us. Yeshua gave his all on the cross. He gave his body, soul, and spirit to redeem us. So he expects that in return. He expects our entire being. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. And love your neighbor as yourself. The law and the prophets hang on these two things. So that's the word attainment. To attain, to acquire wise counsel. Now this Hebrew word wise counsel means to steer or to guide with ropes. Now, when those of you who have children and they're on that crawling stage and they start to stand up and they're holding on to things as they stand up. Then comes teaching them how to walk. Now, what we do is we usually have them stand in front of us, and we hold up their hands, and they probably grab a hold of our thumbs, and they just take one step at a time, and that's how we teach them how to walk. Well, back in the biblical days, they actually did this with ropes. They didn't hold on to their thumbs. They actually held on to ropes that they were holding, almost like they were a marionette puppet. And so that's what this word wise counsel means. It means to steer or to guide with ropes. So we do that when we're teaching young children how to walk, but we also use ropes to steer an animal, to steer a horse, to guide a horse in the right direction. So to steer or to guide with ropes, to guide with a plan or via a plan. So wise counsel means that there's a whole plan and purpose behind it. To steer or to guide. Now, if anybody remembers the original Karate Kid, right? Mr. Miyagi, please teach me karate. Mr. Miyagi, please teach me karate. Okay, I teach karate. So here, you paint my fence. No, not this way. Paint the fence, right? So he paints the fence for days. And he goes, okay, now, wax my car. Wax on, wax off. When am I going to learn karate? No, just wax on, wax off. He does that for a couple days. And then he sands the floor and all this kind of stuff. And then he gets mad. He's like, what? I come here to learn karate, and here I'm doing all your chores that you should be doing. I'm painting fences, and I'm waxing cars, and I'm buffing floors. And he gets so mad, and he says, Daniel-san, show me paint the fence. What do you mean? Show me paint the fence. He throws a punch at Daniel, and with just reflexes, without thinking, he paints the fence and blocks Mr. Miyagi's throw, right? That's what this is, wise counsel, to steer or to guide with ropes, to guide via a plan. Mr. Miyagi had a plan. He was also smart because he got a lot of chores done around his house. But by doing so, he taught Daniel he taught him karate without him even knowing he was learning karate. So it was a plan, it was a wise counsel. He steered Daniel in the right direction. Well, I was hoping to get to verses 6 and 7, but I think that we'll have to stop here. And this I think, is a good stopping point. And we'll pick up with Proverbs chapter 1, verse 6 next week. Does anybody have any questions or any comments? Is everybody learning a lot and soaking this in? Okay, good. That's what I want. All right. Oh, okay. I don't know. There's been a lot of the Lubavitchers believe that Rabbi Schneerson was the Messiah. Well, because he was very wise, but they thought that he was able to fulfill certain prophecies, which I haven't really studied Rabbi Schneerson's life or why they believed he was the Messiah. But even in the scriptures, it talks about how, I think it's the Apostle Paul, or maybe it was John, that said, there have been, messiahs come and go, and false messiahs. And even before Paul was even accused, hey, aren't you that one guy that thought he was the Messiah in Egypt, that rebel rouser, that revolter? Or so, and even in Judaism, in history, General Bar Kokhba was acclaimed by Rabbi Akiva to be the Messiah. And this is when the Jewish believers parted from the non-believing Jewish believers, because up to that point, they were actually worshiping in the same synagogues and going to temple together. And when they had to fight together, the believing Jews were more than willing to fight for their people and for their country, until Rabbi Akiva said, you follow General Bar Kokhba. He is the Messiah. Let's put on the brakes here. He may be a good general, but he's not the Messiah. We know who the Messiah is. Fine, if you're not going to follow General Bar Kokhba and recognize him as the Messiah, get out of here. All right, we'll leave, because we know who our Messiah is. So there's been a lot of messiahs come and go. And the majority of Judaism, Orthodox Judaism, kind of criticizes and ostracizes Chabad, the Chabad organization, because they believe that Schneerson was the Messiah. But yet they still have great numbers and are very popular on the web and in the world. Yep. Any other questions? All right. Let's go ahead and close with a word of prayer.
The Plaster Rock United Baptist Church. Come join us every Sunday morning at 11 a.m.